Hi folks, welcome to another one of my DIY videos. Today I'm going to show you how I make a gallery wrapped canvas print. From print preparation all the way to hanging it on the wall. Gallery wrap prints are an amazing way to display your pictures. The idea is that you wrap a picture over a wooden frame that gives it a real presence on the wall. You can see on this one here, these are 1.5 inch thick pieces of wood that the print is wrapped around. And it gives the print a real presence. It has a classic art of old look to it, especially given the texture of the canvas. The other nice thing about canvas prints, these are wood frames. It's very, very light. You can print huge. You know, imagine doing this with a glass coated metal frame. So the versatility of these prints is huge. Why do it yourself? Well, yeah, there are plenty of labs that will do it for you, but they will charge you by the linear inch, meaning the entire circumference of the print. And that adds up really quickly. You can imagine, you know, a 40-inch by probably 20, 30-inch print very quickly becomes expensive. And that's okay if you do it once, but if you want to display lots of your pictures or even give them to family and friends or even sell them, it's much, much cheaper to do it yourself. The other really satisfying thing about it is you have total creative control. You know, one of the things I really love about it is I'm the one out there seeing the scene, figuring out how to take the picture, pressing the shutter, thinking in my head, how am I going to process this? Am I going to do a gallery print? Am I going to print it on photographic paper, maybe metal? Coming back to the studio, developing it, printing it, and then mounting it all the way to hanging it on the wall. Very, very, very satisfying. And once you have that process dialed, if you do choose to sell your prints, it's very easy to kind of scale up that process and be quite productive. I'll just give you a general flow of how the video is going to go. The first thing we'll do, like I alluded to, is something called soft proofing. If you're going to print your own picture, it's really important that you make some contrast and brightness and often saturation adjustments to really match your computer file to how things are going to look on your print. So that's a bit of a process. There are oodles and oodles of super detailed tutorials online, so that'll be a fairly quick overview. Then we'll talk about, well, how are we going to make edges? You know, I mean, we've got our face print, but we now also need to decide what are we going to do with this wrap here? And so there are a few different options, and we'll go through that and how to set those up. We'll print the picture, and then we'll talk about building the frame. Once the frame is made, then I'll show you stretching the print over the frame and attaching it to the wood. And you can see here, as a preview, you know, we'll be using furniture staples for that. The all-important and ever tricky corners, we'll go through some technique for doing that. That works pretty well for me. And then finally, I'll show you how to put the hanging hardware on and we'll put it up on the wall. So let's dive right in. This is an image from the Great Bear Rainforest on Canada's west coast. It's a tidal river that at high tide you can float up in a boat. It carries the salmon that are spawning upstream, and grizzly bears and black bears can pop out of the bushes just about anywhere. It's quite a mysterious feel with all those overhanging trees and almost constant fog. Pretty magical spot, and I've processed this image on the computer to reflect that. The problem is if I just print this onto canvas, even though it's well suited to canvas and that it's low contrast, the colors aren't too overly saturated, it won't show up like it does here. And part of the reason is that we're looking at this on a screen. That screen right now is transmitting that light to you. And with a print, all the colors and contrast is from reflected light. And so you're relying on light to hit your print and bounce back to your eyes. It's not driven by 120 volts circuit in your house. And so they tend to be dull and not as bright. And so to really reproduce the feel I'm going after with this print, I need to change things so that it will suit the media that I'm printing it on. And this is what the print labs can't understand. They don't know how you felt when you took your image. They don't know what you're going for. And so they will do a generic kind of optimization that may or may not reflect your creative wishes. So this is one of the true pleasures of printing, in that you retain creative control going all the way along. Okay, so here we are. We're in Lightroom in the Develop module. So the first thing we need to do is down at the bottom here, click this soft proofing box, and you'll see, oh my God, what just happened to our picture? And so what Lightroom is doing is using knowledge of the printer and paper that I'm going to print on to simulate how things are going to look. And where you tell it that is up here on the right. Under Profile here, if you click that, and if we just click Other, you'll see a whole list of printer profiles that are installed on your computer. Now, if you've got an Epson printer like I do, these are what you're going to see. It would be different from Canon, HP is another brand. But somewhere on your computer, you'll have a list of these profiles from your printer, and you get to choose which paper you're going to print on. Now, in the case today, this is a canvas from a company called Breathing Color, and it's called Crystalline Canvas Satin, I think. And so they too provide printer profiles. So basically a file that tells the computer how to make things look when you want to soft proof. And so I've installed that on the computer, and that's what we're using here today. The second thing is rendering intent. And that gets a bit complicated, but basically there are two kind of main ways that we will tell the computer and the printer how to handle colors that don't fit within what the printer and the paper can handle. So your computer is capable of producing far more colors than your printer and paper can. And so by picking a rendering intent, we're telling the computer and the printer, okay, either change all the colors and shift the tones and hues to fit everything in, or if you've got colors that are out of range, just chop it off right at the edge and make everything beyond that the same color. So, and you can look, it's easy to flip back and forth. So this is called relative intent, and you can see what happens to the histogram up here. And there's perceptual intent, a little more saturation, and I think that fits best with what we're going for in this image, so that's what we'll go with. But it really is an artistic choice. There is no right answer, although often a perceptual rendering intent comes out to be the best for color printing. So as you can see, and let's just flip this off and on again, when we simulate what's going to happen to the print, it robs us of contrast. You can see that the blacks are not as black, the darks are not as dark, and also maybe desaturates the colors a little bit. And so now what we do is hit this YY. This gives us a before and after view. So now we've got the unchanged image as we developed it on our computer here, and the soft proofed image here. And we'll hit create proof copy, and that'll create a copy of this left-hand image with the changes that we're going to do here recorded. And that's what we'll end up printing. So let's create the proof copy. So now up here you can see regular copy and proof preview. And so now it's a process of generally tweaking contrast and a little bit of color to get the two prints looking similar. You will never, ever get them perfectly aligned. And that's, again, one of the pleasures of printing, and maybe keeps the paper manufacturers alive, is you could print this picture on multiple different photo papers or media, metal prints, canvas prints, photographic paper, fine art, rag, you name it, and it'll come out differently. And that, again, is one of the pleasures of doing this, is picking maybe a media that you think best suits the look that you're going for or the image that you're developing. So we're going to do canvas today, and we're going to start the process now of tweaking this image. And let's just start with the darks. This is one of the main things that changes, is the darks and the shadows. And what you notice, though, is if you think, well, I just need to make it darker, and you crank this black slider, what you'll do is you'll crush the blacks in here and lose all detail. So just watch. We lose a lot of that detail, and we don't really do much for the contrast. And so what I like to use is a little bit of this contrast slider, maybe a little bit of the exposure slider, which moves things sort of globally in terms of a brightness. Then I find these sliders here are very useful. Texture clarity and dehaze are names given to ways that Lightroom will adjust contrast in varying levels of detail. So dehaze is sort of a global or a much more general large area. Clarity is kind of mid details, and texture is fine details. So I start fiddling with these here and trying to get, without crushing blacks, give me a little bit more contrast in what I'm doing. So, and you can see as you adjust contrast, you often adjust color saturation. So you got to keep an eye on that. And sometimes you need to back that off. But the first thing I do is sort of start fiddling with these a little bit. Maybe we can bring the blacks down, keeping an eye on the histogram up here. I mean, it's right up against the edge. So if I drop the blacks too much further, I'm going to lose detail. And I don't want to do that. I've got more room at the whites end of things to play with that in a minute. But down here, it's going to be more sort of contrast adjustments to get the look that I'm after without overdoing it. And this is an iterative process. So back and forth, and it gets really boring to watch on YouTube. So maybe we'll skip ahead a little bit as I play around with this. And you can see the general approach I take, trying to get the two images pretty close. So we'll do that now. Okay, so I think we're pretty close here now. Again, we're never going to get the deep, rich blacks in a canvas print, but the brighter midtones and highlights seem pretty good, and we've got good match of the colors. You'll find some papers shift colors and tones a little bit based on the paper material, and so sometimes you have to come up and adjust that. The color mixer is a good place to do that. You can very selectively adjust, if it gives it a blue cast, and you can almost see that a little bit here. I'm not going to play with it, but I think that's a brightness adjustment that I did as well, and it's bringing in a little bit more blue, but I'm okay with that. That'll print okay. And having done all this, I find as well, and you're going to have to do some experimentation, the final thing as you print is often you need to lighten the whole thing a little bit. And if you could print smaller test versions, that's the best thing, and get a sense. And you'll find for a given image and paper, you often need to just kind of boost the mid-tone brightness a little bit, even though you've got it pretty close with your soft proofing. Okay, so I think we're good from a soft proofing point of view. So next we'll think about sizing the image for print and sharpening. Okay, so here we are. We have our proofed image ready to print. And again, if I uncheck this box here, you'll notice that this is a much more contrasty and saturated image than how we originally started. But again, these changes, when you simulate how it will look on paper, gives a result much closer to what we're hoping. So the next thing to do is size the image for print. And just as an illustration, if we turn on the image overlay here and we look, these here up in the left corner are the pixel dimensions. And it gets a little bit confusing, but if you translate that into inches at, say, 300 dots per inch, which is pretty standard for a printer, this will be somewhere around a 20-something inch wide print. So if that's what you want, that's great, but often you want a custom size. You either want it smaller or bigger, and that process is one of resizing. And in that, it's actually incredibly complicated from a software point of view, and it's an area where software has made real leaps and bounds over the last, say, 10 years. Both Photoshop and other plugins do an amazing job these days of crunching down pixels into a smaller size or expanding the picture and creating new pixels to make it bigger so that you can print bigger. And in the process, often they will sharpen your image, which is the process of making sure that details stand out appropriately, which takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. In Lightroom, there's a print module, which works great.
And here it's gone dark again because it's taken the soft proofing off. And you can see I can change the paper size and the cell size here, and Lightroom will resize it using some version of the Photoshop engine, but you don't have a lot of control. So for this reason, and there are other reasons, we're going to end up in Photoshop anyway, and I'll tell you why in a little while. But my preference is to use a plugin called Gigapixel from Topaz to do the resizing for me. So to do that, I come up to Photo, Edit in, and here I'm going to select Topaz Gigapixel AI from my menu. And this will give me a typical box. I'll edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. And this brings up the interface. Now, what you'll notice here, right now, it's not going to upscale or anything. It's just the native resolution. And like we talked about, that would give a print at 300 pixels per inch on a printer of around 27.5 inches by 18 inches. Now, this is one place where it might be worth adjusting things a little bit. If you look at the crop first, you can look at the crop ratio. Here it works out to nice even numbers. So in this case, a 3:2. So what that means is I can scale that up to whatever size I want and get whole numbers. When we're making a frame and cutting wood, that's really helpful. You know, if you're getting into 0.3874 of an inch, it makes it really difficult to translate that into cutting wood. And so I try and get a whole number ratio like this, which allows me then to scale up or down. So if it wasn't in a nice even ratio like this, I would crop it until I get, and you can choose, say you want a 4:3 ratio, then you could crop it to whatever size and ratio you wanted. Now I want to keep those edges, so I was happy with the 2:3. So let's go back to that. We'll flip that there. Okay. So anyway, so what we'll do now, if we're going to get whole numbers, if we do use a multiplier, I'm going to go with maybe a 36-inch wide print. And watch when I hit enter, that'll change the height for us. And so now we've got a 36 by 24 inch print. So that's great. That means that I've got nice whole numbers for cutting wood and things like that. And what you can see now, obviously there are no faces, we know that, but the computer doesn't. And so now it's resizing it and creating a new file. It will sharpen it. And if we zoom in, you can see some of that process here. So this is what you happen with just sort of enlarging, and this is what the software is doing, even in incredibly complex detail like this. And at 253%, obviously that's not realistic. Really, you should be looking at things at around 50% when you're sharpening. And we'll let it do its work, and there we go. Looks great. So we'll send that back to Lightroom Classic. Okay, so here we are now. I've taken the file from Gigapixel, soft-proofed, sized, and sharpened. And as such, we could print this on photographic paper and have a great result. But what we're seeing now is the face of the print, what you will see when you're looking at the print on the wall. But the actual thing we're going to do is take that print and wrap it around a wooden frame. And this is the so-called gallery wrap. And so we need the print to be big enough that it can wrap around the edges of the wood. And I'll show you in a little bit, but the frame is going to have a depth of about 1.5 inches. And so if we took this picture as is and then tried to wrap it around a frame, it would end up, functionally, it would end up cropping the print a fair bit, because we'd have to use some of these edges out here to wrap around that 1.5 inch piece of wood. And so would end up with a much smaller piece of picture to look at. And now if you've got a picture that has all sorts of featureless sky or ocean or something, maybe that's something that it doesn't matter, and that's fine. But in this case, we've cropped it specifically into the dimension and with the detail that we want. And so for the sake of argument, we say we're going to keep this as is. This is what we want to see on the wall. So we're going to have to come up with a way now to make essentially more picture to wrap around the stretcher bars. So the first thing we need to do is in Photoshop here, and this is something you can't do in Lightroom, is come up under image here and come to canvas size. So we know, and this tells us our picture is 36 by 24 inches. So that's great. But like I said, we've got at least 1.5 inches of depth of stretcher bar, and then we need the print to wrap under the stretcher bar a little bit so that we can staple it down. And again, I'll demonstrate this a bit later. So what I usually do, I will add a couple of inches all the way around to give me that latitude to work with. And so in this box here, this is where we can add that. So if we want 2 inches on each side, that equals an increase of 4 inches of width and also an increase of 4 inches of height. And what this means is that it's going to add that equally around the whole print. We hit OK. Now what you see is that extra canvas. And if I turn on the rulers, now you'll see that we have a print that is 40 inches wide, 28 inches deep, inside of which is our 36 by 24 picture. And this stuff out here, this white stuff, is what's going to get wrapped around the wood. So now you've got some choices to make. There are a lot of different ways that you could fill, because this will just come out as plain white canvas if it's printed as is. And if you want white edges around your print, leave it as and print it like that. Other people, you'll see edges that are just pure black. And then there are ways of sort of trying to extend the picture out into this area so it looks a bit more realistic as it's wrapped around. And there are several ways to do that. So I'll show you a couple of different techniques, and you can choose which best works for what you're trying to do. So we've got our enlarged canvas. First thing we need to do is select this white area so we can manipulate it. And there's a tool over here which is great for that, and that's the magic wand tool. You know, the difference in contrast between these things is so great that even just one click, watch what happens. It selects the whole area perfectly, as you can see by these dotted lines. So now we can start playing around with different ways to fill it. So, for example, we talked about filling the edges with black. So we could come out here now and go Edit, Fill. And what it's referring to is inside this selected area here. And we could fill it with black. And you could pick whatever color you want. And I've seen that is finding a color that complements what's in the image here. But for the sake of argument, let's just pick black, hit OK, and boom, there it is. And then we'll just deselect. And so then the edges of your print would be all black. And this is a nice way to do it if you're going to do a floating frame. So you're going to take your gallery wrapped canvas and then build another frame around it, but that's a bit smaller, and that's called a floating frame, and that's a nice effect. So Photoshop has some other tools that you can use. Say you want to sort of use some of what the image is here. So we've got a couple of different options here. Older one is something called Content Aware Fill, and so it'll look at the picture around there. Now it's going to exclude this white mist, and maybe, you could say, yeah, okay, I don't want any of the white mist in there for sure. Something like that. Okay. And if you look over on the right here, it's going to chew away and kind of fill those empty spaces with what it thinks is similar to what's around there. Let's just deselect it here and we can look. So let's zoom in a little bit here. And you can see, so clearly you can see the edge here. And, the detail isn't perfect. There's a lot of repetition. Again, there's that hard line. And if you were printing this flat, that would not be an acceptable result. But again, this edge is where you're going to fold it over the wood. And actually, you'll see when we're doing that process, having a visual reference to know where the crease needs to be is actually kind of helpful. So again, these areas are the edges of the print. The top is never seen. The edges are often in shadow, and it's pretty close. The colors and the textures kind of match, especially down here in the water. So that might work just fine. A newer technique using AI that generates pixels in a different way. So we go again, edit, and this time we can go to generative fill. And, you could get into, fill it with pink unicorns. It would sort of try and do something crazy. But if you don't put anything in the prompt here and just hit generate, it again will look at the picture and try and come up with what it thinks is the right content to fill that area. Okay, so here we go. So here's one, and it'll spit out several variations for you. So here's one variation. And again, if we zoom in a little bit, let's look around quickly. You can still see where the edge is. It's got some funny artifacts across the bottom here. I don't know where it came up with that. But again, you do get the sense there's an edge here, a bit more subtle than content-aware fill, which is nice. It added a treetop here. Anyway, and then you could go through the different versions. Again, looking at the top here as it changes, and you could decide, let's look at the bottom here and look in this corner, maybe what works the best if you like that effect. So again, another way to do it. Now I'm going to show you a way that I prefer, and it's a lot clunkier and it takes a lot longer, but I'll show it to you just so you have that as another option. And what you do is cut out a piece of the picture and you mirror that and fill this area with that piece. And so the first thing to do is you set up your rectangular marquee tool here. And up here, you want to go to fixed size. And I know that this gap here is 2 inches. So we want it 2 inches. And in this case, it's 24 inches high at the moment. And then you just click on the image and there, it's sort of cut out a piece of the picture. Now, if you're doing this, what you don't want to do is get any white in what you're creating. You'll see why in a minute. So I'm going to use the arrow keys just to nudge this up close to the edge, but I don't want any white in there. Okay, so now I've got this area selected and I'm going to hit copy, which on a Mac is Command C. And then I'm going to hit paste, which is Command V, and watch what happens over in the layers panel. So now it's created a layer with just that copied cutout that we just selected. So nothing's mirrored yet. So with that layer selected, then we come into Edit, Transform, and we want to flip it horizontally to mirror it. So we hit Flip Horizontal, and there you can see that layer now is flipped. And then pressing V to get to the Move tool, I can slide this over to the edge. And again, it's worth zooming in because you can get little funny pixel artifacts. So, and again, I usually play with the, see there, okay, so there's a little white line. So you want to make sure, and I even go kind of 1 or 2 extra pixels like that. I don't care if there's a little white edge here, that's behind the print. What I don't want is anything funny in there. And you can see now, so that's a perfect mirror of what was there. It's an easy reference, and when you actually print it and wrap it, it looks pretty good. It looks like a natural continuation. Now, what you need to do, though, is flatten this layer, because otherwise you're just going to select empty pixels. So, Layer, Flatten. So now it's like we're starting at the beginning again. Okay, so there you have it. So a little bit fiddly, but now we have a 36 by 24 face print with almost a couple of inches of mirrored wrap that can wrap around our stretcher bars. And so now, finally, we're ready to print it.
All right, while our print is drying after printing, I'll show you making a frame. First thing I want to do is introduce you to a stretcher bar. So there are multiple sources online that you can source these. These are usually pine or some other softwood, and they've got a very particular shape. And if you notice straight on, if I can get it just about right, there's a flat part at the very top, and that's where the print rolls over, but then it goes down on a diagonal, so you don't have this large area sort of showing on the face of the print. So it's got just a little thing, and then it drops off. And the other thing, often they'll have a tongue-in-groove corner. So if you buy stretcher bars of the exact size that you need, or it's more like you make the print to the size of the stretcher bars, you can use these tongue-in-groove joins like this and press them together. And then I usually put some glue in there and some staples, and pretty easy assembly. The thing is though, often a lot of my prints are different sizes than the standard stretcher bars, and so we end up having to cut them and making just a free join like that. And this obviously is a bit weaker, and I'll show you how I deal with that. So this is how a stretcher bar works. It's about 1.5 inches thick here. You can get different sizes. You can get 1/2 inch thick. Obviously not quite as chunky on the wall, but I like these for the size of prints that I make. This is a nice match. Okay, so let's measure up our frame. Now, there's a couple of tricks I want to show you. Having wasted tons of wood, take it slow on this part and triple check. You know, the old saying, measure twice, cut once, maybe measure 4 times, do a dry assembly or 2, and then cut. So we remember the print is 36 by 24. That's the size of the face that we have. So that's the size that we want our frame to be. So I'll just measure out here. This is one of the shorter stretcher bars, so this will be a 24. And let me show you what I do here. One of the things I've learned to avoid, I measure, that's 24 inches now. And now look, this edge here tells me which angle I need to cut. This is a 45-degree cut. And so I've already marked it. And down here, I'm just going to do that. So I know the angle I need to cut. So many times I've cut at the wrong angle. So just a little trick there so that you cut it in the right way. All right, so let's set up the saw and I'll show you that. All right, so we've measured the stretcher bar. Now I want to show you how to cut it. You know, it's one of the successes of your frames depends on how good and square your joins are. And so you want a really reliable way of getting a perfect 45-degree cut. And obviously there are tools out there that do that for us. Here's a really simple one. It's a hand saw, but it's in a jig that you can change the angle on. And again, not too expensive. The blades here are replaceable and super fine. So they're made for kind of crafting cuts. I must admit, if I have a bunch of prints to do, I have a power chop saw that I'll use for that, and you can do that too if you already have one. But if you don't, this is a lovely option for an occasional framing project. So what we'll do now, we'll load up the stretcher bar to cut it. So it's pretty easy. You lay it in here, and now you want to set the angle on the saw here. And so I want 45 degrees, like so. And now what I'll do is, it doesn't really matter where you put the saw blade, whether you put it on your mark to one side or the other. You just need to be consistent with every cut you make. Because if you're sort of wibbling back and forth, those few millimeters here and there actually end up making it for a wonky angle. So just choose one and be consistent. You know, because the saw blade, whether it's a chop saw or this, take out a little bit of wood, and so you change the length. So I usually just kind of put it so kind of just, I can see the mark on the other side, like so. When I'm happy with that, I'll use clamps. These sorts of clamps are really handy, and you can just sort of slide it on to kind of make sure the wood doesn't shift around while I cut. So there, now my wood is nice and stable, and I can gently, and because this is such a fine-toothed blade, very slowly and gently, down we go. So I'll saw this off. All right. A little bit there. And now we have a nice, perfect 45-degree angle stretcher bar. Okay, so now let's just make sure that we've got everything cut the right way before we start doing anything permanent. All right, so I've got all my stretcher bars that I'm hoping I cut to the right length and at the right angles. And a way to check that is do a dry assembly. So let's do that. So remember how we looked at these things? So you want the angle piece facing in towards the print, and the print wraps around this tall edge here. So these are my cut ends, so those will go together like that. And then the tongue and groove join, we'll have a couple of those corners out there like that. And this is the moment of truth. If this matches this, which it does, and the cut matches the cut. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I've got all my cuts right. And we'll just double check the lengths. Make sure everybody's the same length. There we go. Okay. What I do is I glue the tongue and groove parts to give me two angles, and then I'll glue the cut ends, and I'll show you how I clamp it. So let's just quickly glue the tongue and grooves, and we'll go from there. And I use just a basic wood glue you can get anywhere for that. As you know, for my gluing projects, I always have something handy because they tend to be messy. All right, so let me just do that now. I put a little bit here. It's gonna push it against, and so I kind of put it on the outside here, like that, and a little bit on the edge. Just, you don't need a ton, and you end up, if you put too much, you end up wiping it all off anyway. And then the two come in like this, and then it's a bit of a working it in process, like so. And what you're trying to do is get that corner to line up perfectly. And you can see the extra glue kind of being pushed out. So just kind of, and we're going to clamp this while it's wet. So we'll still have a little bit of leeway. Okay, so there's one. I'll do the other one. All right, so clamps. So there are myriad clamps, but if you go online and search for framing clamps, you can find rigid ones like this, where the two ends get clamped in, and then you screw these in like this to sort of hold it rigidly. I've used these, they work okay. They're heavy and they're clunky though, and what I found I prefer is a webbing based clamp. It's got a screw part that actually tightens the webbing. I'll show you that in a second, but I find you've got a huge amount to play with here. So big frames, small frames, it's really, really versatile and pretty cheap, honestly, and I have yet to break one. So let me show you how this works. So the first thing, pick a corner, and you know, that's our one corner there, and then they have these other plastic corners that you then, and obviously, okay, so that's too short right now. So all I need to do is loosen this and give myself some more room to work with. So we'll see if that's enough. And you can watch me. Oh, need a bit more yet. Okay, so that's the general idea. And then, you know, I kind of, for this part, I pull it in kind of hand tight, and I'll show you why in a sec, like so. Okay, so now I'm pretty much ready to go. So it's dry fit. I've glued the two corners. So next thing I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to flip the frame over, and that'll become clear in a second. We'll glue the cut edges and we'll go from there. So this is now the non-print side, or the back side of the frame. We've dry fit it. We know our clamp's about ready to go, so let's get some glue in there. And again, you don't want to over glue because you end up just wiping it off. So that goes in there. Another one up here. Like so. Get it back in our frame. All right, so a couple of things. So now we've got glued corners and we're in the clamp. You want to make sure that, and if we come in close, that these corners that we've just glued here are pretty close. You don't want them all screwed off like that. So make sure that everything kind of lines up nicely. We can wipe off the excess right now. And I'm just checking. And then what we can do is start tightening the clamp. And you'll see this silver part, see it's coming back and it's pulling the webbing tight. And pretty easy. You got a lot of mechanical advantage. And you can see pretty tight, and you can see the extra glue sort of oozing out. And as I do it, I just recheck a few times that my corners are still happy, like that. And the other thing you want to make sure is during the clamping process that the stretcher bars have stayed on the same level. You don't want one glued down there like that. They slip off. And so that's another thing to check. I'm just wiping off the excess glue here. And there visually, you can see nice and flat. I'll do the same on this gooey corner. Okay, so now you want to make sure that the whole thing hasn't sort of shifted like a parallelogram. And this is what I use a builder's square for. We've got a perfect right angle in there, and so I just put it in each corner. Technically, you only need to do a couple of corners, but and I make sure that I don't have any big angle. And, it's still malleable enough. You can kind of give it a wiggle until you're happy everything is a perfect square. That's pretty good. Okay, there's going to be some natural variation in the wood. I mean, the drying process can warp it a little bit. Sometimes it twists. I mean, generally they're amazing, and it's incredibly how perfect they are. But, there is a bit of give and take there, and that's a handcrafted product. That's just part of it. But you can get it pretty close most times. These are called V-nails, and it's a piece of metal, and if you come really, really close, you can see in the light there's a little sharp edge on it, and that's what goes into the wood. And I use these to reinforce the corners. Now you can buy something called a V-nailer, which is a jig that you mount the frame in and then you pull a handle. But honestly, good old-fashioned hammers work just perfectly. And so I put them in every corner. I put 2 in the one with the tongue-in groove, because that's pretty strong anyway. And I put 3 on just the cut edges. I try and get one really close to the inside here. And it goes dead simple. And then I put one sort of at the outside corner as well. These are the sort of stress points. Now we have a frame that's cut to size. It's glued, it's nailed at the corners. You might notice these slots inside the frame here. Different companies put them in different ways in different places. And you can buy cross braces So if, say, you're doing a print that maybe is a panorama and it's sort of a 2-to-1 ratio, so maybe it's a 6-foot by 3-foot frame, you've got long runs of these spans that aren't necessarily the stiffest, and so they recommend much over 30 inches long that you put a cross brace through, and these slots are supposed to line up with the cross braces that they sell. Obviously, if you're cutting custom frames, they never line up. But if I'm doing a long print, more than say 40 inches wide, I will use a piece of wood and just some little L brackets that I put across here and screw in on each side, just with a little bracket and a short wood screw. And that just gives it a little bit of rigidity, so the length of the print doesn't kind of sag like that over time. You'd be amazed actually how wrapping the canvas on the frame sort of stiffens everything up. But much over, like I said, sort of 40 inches or so, I'll put in a cross brace for panoramics and things like that. But now we have our, nice and light, pretty rigid already. The glue needs a little while to dry, although it's pretty solid with the nails in the corner. And so I just kind of sit it and go and do something else for a while, maybe have a coffee. We've taken the clamp off the frame, and I've done a little bit of corner touch-ups with the chisel. Watch your fingers doing that. Just taking off extra glue and any wood burrs and things like that that would catch on the canvas. So now we're ready to mate the frame to the print. And if you remember, the print sits, the face of the print is on the side that bevels in like this. The side where the nails are is the back. And so what's going to happen is we need a way to attach our print over top of the frame like that. You'll remember on the computer we stretched out those corners, and you can see on the print here, if I kind of get it out of the light, there's our reflection line. So this is what we're going to use to know where to fold that over the frame. That's what we're going to try and get really precise. And so let me just show you a couple ways of doing that. Unless you do a lot of these, you're going to be doing this by hand, and probably the simplest device to do this is just a little hand stretching tool. So what it is, it's got a little spring load like this, and some grips that you grip the canvas with, and you bend it around the frame like that. So if you're going to do it this way, what you're going to need to do is figure out from the physical edge of the canvas your reflection line is. So in this one, say it's about 4 inches, okay, on each side. And you'll notice I've put just a fleece blanket on the table here so that I don't wreck the print when we flip it like this. Now I know that reflection line's about 4 inches under there, and that needs to mate with that corner. So now I can simply measure. Okay, let's get the frame kind of lined up. There's 4 inches, 3 1/4. That's also 3 1/4, so I'm pretty much square. And then what you can do, wrap it over. And this is where this hand tool comes in. You grip it, this knob goes on the frame here, and you stretch it over like that, okay? Go back and forth, making sure that you're all lined up, but you're gonna have to do it kind of blind. So that's one way to do it. And then to attach it, you're gonna use a furniture stapler. So I have this one, Now this is, you can see this is a pneumatic one, so driven by an air compressor. I like it because I do a fair bit of this, and so it's a little bit quicker and it's a bit more consistent. You can vary the air pressure to the staple, and once you get that kind of set, it's very quick. Other options, you can use a hand stapler, but again, you're looking for furniture staples, so the things that, or upholstery staples. I've used electric ones, they work pretty well, and again, there's a little bit of adjustment on those in terms of how hard they drive the staple in. And you're looking for kind of a 3/4 inch staple like that. Something like that, that'll sit nicely into the wood. It doesn't split the wood, but also will give good hold to the print. Now, you've probably been wondering what this medieval looking device is, and this is a manual stretching contraption. Okay, so these come in very expensive, pneumatically driven electric versions where you just load the frame and bang, bang, bang. And that's how they do the mass-produced crap that you buy at grocery stores and department stores. This is obviously hand-operated, and that's what we'll use here, just so you can get a look at that. The advantage of this is now I can do it with the print face up. So now I get to actually see it as I line it all up. I feed it into the frame like this, and you can see what's happening underneath here. These little, so imagine the canvas is wrapped in there now. That closes, and now these things with the lever kind of push while we hold the canvas, and then I'll staple underneath. Whether you're using a hand stapler or a hand stretcher or one of these machines, the general process is you want to kind of attach the first point to the frame and then go to the other side and do the long staple line. Then you can take out the little holding staple and sort of go from there side by side by side. And that'll become clear in a second as we do that. All right, so I've put the frame in the machine here, and I've been fiddling around trying to get the print lined up. So what I'm doing is I put a little pressure here. Now this edge I don't need to do just yet. I'm gonna get that in a second. It's more the side to side that's key. So out here I've just been kind of checking. You can see where the reflection line is right there, where my thumb is. But before I do anything, I'm just gonna check I've not screwed up everything there. Okay. And now I'm bringing it down to the reflection line. It's pretty good. And now I have a little lip under here that I can use my staple gun. Now, I recommend not sticking your face right over top of the staple gun when you do this. The key now is that it's all kind of lined up. So now I can start maneuvering and lining things up perfectly, but now I've got it pretty much square on the frame. And again, you can do that by measuring with it like that and using the hand tool. It's just a bit fiddly, but once you've got this part done, now everything moves a lot quicker. So let's put in a full line of staples. All right, so I've mounted it in the machine. So this is the stretching part now. So very gently, those clamps under there are gonna move the frame. And you can go fairly tight. These two staples up here are holding it reasonably well. You don't wanna rip the canvas, and you're just gonna have to get a little bit of a feel for it. Okay. I'm giving it just, I'm creating the edge and just a gentle crease here. If you overstretch it, you'll crack it. So just back off a little bit there. Okay, it's already quite stiff. And now I put a staple about, I don't know, every 1/2 inch or inch starting at one end. But what you don't want to do, you don't want to go right out to the corner. You want to leave yourself, 2 or 3 inches there, and you'll see why when we do the corners in a minute. So here's the corner. I'm going to come back and we'll just kind of do our staple line. Okay. So there's our line of staples, and we've got our first edge stretched over. And you can see it was pulling these out a little bit. That's all right. Now I want to remove them fully. So little screwdriver is helpful, and a pair of pliers. And trying not to, so I just kind of lift it a little, trying not to get metal on the print, you know, and scratch it, but that's that one out. So now we can load this side into the frame. So this should lay pretty much lined up, but as with most things, it's always good to check. The nice thing about the machine and the difference between this thing is, you know, this thing is 6 feet long and this thing is, what, 2 inches wide. So it gives a nice even stretch. Sometimes with this, you can get kind of more stretch on one and you put in a couple staples and then you do another one, you don't stretch it quite the same and your print can wrinkle. So in smaller prints, it's a lot easier, but on a long run like this, one of these long machines is really helpful. But, you know, like I said, you get a feel for how much to kind of stretch each time, and it's just a slow, incremental process. Keep sharp tools away from your print. Learn that the hard way. Okay, so again, not straight to the corner, maybe about this far, and we'll put our line. 2 lines there. So this part now, the edges should go a little bit quicker. Put it in the middle there. Okay, these ones, you just kind of want to fold the corners out of the way. So if you're going to use one of these machines, they can sort of get in the way a little bit. And I'm using the edge of the print against the white part of the canvas to make sure that I'm kind of lining it up evenly. Now actually this doesn't actually need a lot of stretching. It's really anchored along these 2 edges. So this is just kind of pulling this final part out. And you can see now we've got our edge, or that reflection right along the corner there. I mean, there's a lot of glare, but so at this point, you know, if you've blown it, you've blown it. I mean, there's not a lot you can do in terms of shifting the print. But as you can see, you know, with a canvas print, there, you know, you've got a fair bit of play. Again, leaving about, I don't know, 3 inches or so from the corner. Boom. So that's the stretching part. So now we've mounted our picture to our frame. What about these ugly corners? And there's a lot on the internet about how to deal with corners. And I'll show you my technique. What I like to do, you can see here, so the staple line ends here. Now we've got some room to work with. And you can see I can pull this back, and this is key. So you've got room to tuck things in. What I want is sides to be tucked into the top or bottom. So the short edge on a landscape oriented print, I want the sides to be tucked up here where you can't see them. You know, when you walk in the room, you can see the sides of a print, but not the top. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to take this part and tuck it in here and fold the corner over. So the first thing is, we got to get rid of all this extra material. What I like to do is start kind of around about the edge of the frame, and with some scissors, come down and cut this whole thing off until it comes even below the edge of the frame down there. Okay, you don't want too much material. I sort of come in like this, make a nice, something like that. But that's now garbage. So now what I'll do is I'm going to anchor this part. So this is actually where I use the hand tool, and I'm going to come in and just stretch this corner out a little bit, just gently like that. You don't have to reef on it. You know, you can get that nice, and then you can use your thumb actually just to hold that edge. And now I'm going to come in and just a couple of precision staples. And now I'm going to pull this away from the top, in this case, and just with my fingers, fold that under there, like so. And what you want is to manipulate things. There's our corner fold. Okay, I've tucked it in wrap this up over. And you can see there's a bit of a wrinkle here, and that's okay. Again, we're going to use our hand stretcher here. And again, just keep everything square. Just gently kind of give it a pull. This just helps manipulate the canvas. Okay, so now I've got my corner, and not stapling your thumb. Bang, bang. That's locked. And then you can look at the edges here. And I usually just use my thumbs here to straighten out any wrinkles. And a couple more. Bang, bang. So that's how we do corners. So now I just got to do the other three. All right, well, there you go. So we have now stretched the canvas. And let's have a look. There we go. So again, big prints are designed to be viewed from a distance, you know, and there are formulas about how far, but generally, you know, if you're up here like this, geez, yeah, I can see the texture of the canvas, and, you know, is maybe a little bit of a fold, a little bit off. Yeah, maybe. But here, have a look at the edges. You know, that's not too bad. You know, and again, from a distance, most viewers will forgive any millimeter-like misalignments. But, you know, you've got a general kind of, you get the sense that the forest is wrapping around here. And like we said in the video, this could be black. It could be, you know, you can get the computer to make stuff up for you. Or you can just print the print bigger and just fold the whole thing over and save the whole edge thing, essentially cropping your print by a bit. And I'll sometimes do that often on the top if it's just blue sky. Featureless sky, who cares? You don't need to make more of that, so I'll just crop the print and crop a little bit of the sky off. So now, how are we going to hang it? So let's get that stuff ready. All right, so I like to trim off some of the excess canvas back here. I find over time it sort of curls up a bit and can lift the print off the wall. So I just use an X-Acto knife and just kind of freehand gently remove the extra. So now all we need to do, all that's left is put in some hanging hardware. And for that, I use a couple of screw eyes. They don't need to be massive. Again, these prints are really light. So just something to screw into the wood and some hanging wire. Generally, with a print, you want your hanging stuff to sort of come around about sort of between the top third and lower 2/3. You know, that gives it a little bit of sag. If you put it too far down, the print's kind of wibbly wobbly and unstable. So you want the mass of the print sort of a fair bit under where your hanging point is. So this is the top here there. So what I'll do, I like to drill a pilot hole. It just makes putting those screw eyes in so much easier. And for a print this size, I just use the drill as a measuring tool, you know, just so it's consistent. So, you know, that's about the third there. A little bit there. You know, and I'm only going in about that far just to get the little screw eyes started. And now with the pilot hole, it makes it really easy just to do it by hand. You don't need tools and pliers and all that. Like so. And as far as the wire goes, there are no special knots or anything. But you do want to give, I like to give folks a little bit extra to play with. I mean, you never know how things are going to go there. One thing I do though is just put a double wrap through the eyelet, like so, you know, just so friction holds it, and then just do some wraps like this. Now this wire is, it's not bare wire, it's coated. It's got a plastic coating on it, which gives it some nice friction. Look at that, I'm pulling pretty hard on that, and that's not going anywhere. So you can do it with bare wire as well, but I like the plastic coating. It's gives a bit more friction when you're tying the knots. So that's straight, so we need to give it a bit more than that, maybe a little bit loose. I don't know if you ever have tried to hang a print where the wire was too tight and you're trying to get your hand up in behind and get the thing on the hook. It's a pain in the butt. So give them a little bit of extra. And then maybe some more room to play. Okay, there, like so. And then finally, the final touch of vanity. Again, if you're selling these things, you know, I like to staple a card of mine to the back. And there we have it. Kingdom of the Great Bear. Printed, edges done, stretched, and ready to hang. Thanks for watching.